I get it. You're standing in the garage, staring at the wall of welding gear you've already collected, and you're wondering if adding another machine will actually solve anything or just end up as another pricey piece of metal you never use. You don't want to drop a couple $100 on a welder that promises the world but leaves you tinkering with settings you never figured out. And you definitely don't want to buy something that looks great on paper but turns out to be a nightmare on a real job site. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. When I started digging into the Miller 907757 Multimatic 220, I was looking for the kind of tool that could genuinely replace a small fleet of dedicated machines. I've talked to a few shop owners who juggle a MIG for sheet metal, a TIG for thin-wall stainless, and a Flux-Cored unit for outdoor work. Their biggest gripe? Switching power sources, relearning control layouts, and the sheer amount of floor space those separate rigs eat. The Multimatic 220 advertises itself as an honest-op shop, so the first question I asked myself was whether it really delivers on that promise in a day-to-day environment, not just in a brochure. Let's start with the core idea, a single unit that can run MIG, Flux-Cored, and TIG processes, and that can plug into either 120V or 240V outlets. For a hobbyist with a standard home garage, the ability to run off a regular 120V circuit means you can get to work without hiring an electrician to install a dedicated line. If you have a 240V supply in a small commercial shop, you can flip the voltage selector and immediately tap into the higher amperage range for thicker material. In my conversations with owners of small fabrication shops, that flexibility was repeatedly called a deal-maker because it lets them adapt to the job at hand without rewiring the entire space. Now, the practical side of the multiprocess claim. I set up the Multimatic 220 on a workbench and tried 3 typical scenarios: spot welding a 1/8-inch steel plate with MIG, making a delicate 24-gauge stainless joint with TIG, and laying a bead on a 1/4-inch CH pipe outdoors using Flux-Cored wire. The MIG gun felt solid, the trigger response was smooth, and the machine automatically adjusted the voltage curve when I switched from 0.6mm to 0.9mm wire. That auto-adjust feature saved me a few minutes of hunting through the manual, which is a genuine time saver when you're moving between projects. The TIG torch, on the other hand, required a bit more hands-on tweaking. The torch itself is a standard Miller design, and the foot pedal works exactly as you'd expect. The real benefit came from the machine's built-in AC balance control, which allowed me to dial in a clean weld on the thin stainless without spatter. For anyone who's been frustrated by having to buy a separate AC balance module for a dedicated TIG unit, having that integrated saves both money and bench space. Flux-Cored welding outdoors is where the power flexibility really shines. I plugged the unit into a 120V generator, cranked the voltage up, and laid a bead on a rust-covered pipe that would normally need a higher amperage than a 120V setup could provide. The machine held its own, though I did notice a slight dip in arc stability when I pushed past 150 amps. In a real-world shop that runs long, continuous runs, that could translate to a bit more operator fatigue, but for occasional field repairs it's hardly a deal-breaker. Who should seriously consider the Multimatic 220? If you're a small shop owner who currently runs a separate MIG and TIG, or a serious DIYer who wants to tackle everything from automotive repairs to backyard art projects, the ability to switch processes on the fly without swapping out the whole machine is a huge convenience. The package includes a MIG gun, a TIG torch, a set of work cables, and a multi-voltage plug, so you're not left hunting for compatible accessories after the purchase. That all-in-one bundle is where the value really starts to show up, especially when you compare the cost of buying 3 separate Miller units. On the flip side, if you're a professional fabricator who consistently works with high amperage MIG on thick structural steel, you'll quickly discover the Multimatic's upper limit of around 200 amps on 240V is modest compared to dedicated heavy-duty MIG machines that push 300 amps or more. The machine's internal cooling system does a respectable job, but it's not designed for marathon welding sessions that run for hours on end. In those environments, you're better off sticking with a purpose-built welder that can sustain higher duty cycles without overheating. Another practical consideration is the learning curve. Because the control panel tries to accommodate 3 different processes, the interface is a bit more layered than a single-purpose unit. There are separate knobs for voltage, wire feed speed, and TIG amperage, and a selector switch for choosing the process. If you're new to welding, you'll spend a few minutes getting comfortable with where each setting lives. That said, the manual is well organized, and Miller's online video tutorials walk you through each.